They're coming to get you, Barbara. They're coming for you, Barbara.
And welcome to another tantalizing episode of Schreck Talk. How are you doing? We've got Mr. Josh here with us. He is Mr. Joshua.
Thank you.
He's a little bit congested tonight, so if he sounds a little weird, that's why.
Yeah, you may hear me, hopefully don't hear me getting all weird and awkward. It's mostly just a little off-key, but I think it shouldn't get too bad.
But we've got a couple of beers sitting with us here tonight, drinking, sitting around talking about movie remakes. What are your thoughts on movie remakes, Mr. Joshua?
This is a topic we can actually get a lot of details because it's not something that's, cut and clean that we can't, my opinion isn't 100% one way or 100% the other. I see different aspects of it, and I see the good and the bad, and there's a lot to talk about it, and I think it's something that's really it's a complex issue to discuss.
Yeah, it's something that's really, really prevalent these days. I just kind of did a little research on it. I went looking through Wikipedia, and I went through and I just typed in list of movie remakes, and I found several hundred lists of movie remakes. And I actually went through and I calculated. And if you want to know kind of how popular this trend has been, I counted up all the remakes, everything before 1995 and everything after 2000, between 1995 and 1999. I didn't include those movies because they were kind of at the transition period where I thought that Hollywood was kind of changing everything up and starting to really put out a lot of remakes. But 45% of all movies, of all remakes of all time, going back to the early 1900s they had on this list, 45% of them have been released in the last 10 years, or last 15 years, I guess, since 2000. So when you kind of look at that, there is a real issue with that high percentage of your movies, your remakes, being released in the last 15 years. You kind of look at that and you know you've got a problem with Hollywood.
Yeah, I agree. You can see, and just looking at the releases of films, the way films were marketed, the way they were released in the mid-90s, you really did start to see the industry change. The amount of films that were being released at a single time, if you look at the amount of films that are released, were in release at any given point in the 90s, the 80s, at different eras, compared to the amount of films that were in release now, or even in the early 2000s, how the amount of films coming out is excessive, and so it's in this bloated marketplace. What do we get in all of our smaller films that are original and are create? Maybe these creatives get kind of buried underneath the Hollywood weight of these blockbusters, these remakes, adaptations of different source materials, TV shows, things like that. Trying to market to nostalgia, I would say, to the familiarity that people have instead of trying to sell an original new story.
Yeah, and the weird thing about that, though, is that they're just basically trying to sell people on the idea of this thing that they used to love. You've got a name recognition, a name brand, so let's throw this out there. We don't really care a lot of times what the product is, but let's just slap this name on there and put it out.
Yeah, and it's even gotten to the point so extreme that we're now doing it with how many movies are we getting based on toys and games? I mean, the Transformer franchise is a massively successful, franchise that originated. It's owned by Hasbro, a toy company. We have a Battleship movie. The Ouija movie just came out, a movie based on the Ouija board. I mean, there's so many things now. They're looking for every way they can steal off of something that people are familiar with, and market it to a new audience. Try and stamp it as fresh and new.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I have a problem. In fact, another big issue I have is that these movies that they're remaking haven't been gone for very long. I don't remember my exact number calculations, but I think it was about 39% of those movie remakes from 2000 until now are remakes of movies that aren't even 30 years old. They remake them within 30 years. I mean, how kind of hard up do you have to be for an idea that you have to recycle something that the audience that watched it when it originally came out aren't even senior citizens yet?
Yeah, now I can see an argument for some really old films. Recently, we had for example, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which is a film from the late '40s that was just remade. So you're talking a gap of well over 50 years, close 60 years. Maybe it's okay at that point. The film has kind of been lost among other audiences. Or for example, The Money Pit being a remake of Mr. Blanding Builds a Dream House. That was about a 40-year difference there, 35-year. Some of these cases maybe they're trying to reinvent it. But sometimes they're reaching too much into what's already come out, and especially when they're remaking foreign films that are released within the last year.
Don't get me started about that. They remake a foreign film in a year. We are going to talk about that a little bit. They do that quite a bit. It's like American audiences are too dumb to read subtitles, or they're too spoiled to read subtitles. They can't enjoy the original flick.
Now, while I agree, I understand why they do that, because as American audiences it is kind of unfortunate. For example, to bring up a TV show, they just remade Broadchurch into a show on the U.S., which was a huge hit over in England, where they actually speak English. And all the actors, it can completely be translated with the popularity of Sherlock and Doctor Who. I don't understand why they felt the need. They even cast David Tennant in the same role he played in the British version. I just don't understand why we have to get so many remakes of things that are from other countries. It doesn't make sense. Even when they speak English, we're remaking it.
Yeah, and it's like Hollywood is just either they're so hard up for money that they don't want to try anything original, or they just are that unoriginal and don't want to step outside of their comfort zone. They would rather release, a movie that was released 15 years ago that was hugely popular, or in this case, let me see, Karate Kid, which was released about 30 years afterwards. They released that because people know about Karate Kid. And let's cast a young hot star, Will Smith's son, and let's get Jackie Chan up in there, get some name recognition. I think it's unnecessary. The first movie was great as it was. Why do we need to remake it?
Yeah, and even to use that film as an example, the original title of that film was supposed to be The Kung Fu Kid. It was supposed to be, a remake still of the Karate Kid, but it was supposed to also try and bring something different and new to it. I understand that they tried to do it, but at the end, they still felt the need to include the exact same scenes from the previous movie. The story was carbon copy, and I didn't think while it was well acted on the parts of the people, it in no way brought anything new or original that the first film didn't do. The first film wasn't that dated. Yes, it was made in 1984. But it aged well. I mean, the ideas and the themes still hold up to this day, and obviously there's a reason they remade it, and it sold moderately well. It didn't sell amazing, but it sold moderately well. But it was literally the first movie all over again, pretty much, I felt. And as much as I love Jackie Chan, I don't think it added anything new to the franchise at all.
No, and it kind of wanted to reinvent the franchise for a new audience when I didn't think it needed reinvention. I mean, you wanted to make a new movie, just make a new movie. Don't try to play off the exact same story of the first one. They made 3 sequels to it. 3 of them, and I thought actually they were all 3 pretty good. I mean, they weren't as good as the first one, although I do think the second one was better. But they weren't all that great. But they were halfway decent. Just make a new one. Throw the kid in there, create a whole new story instead of playing off the original one with the title, and throwing all these scenes in there that are eerily similar to the very first one.
Now, we do have a slightly different view, I think, on films that are adaptations of literary sources, other material, things along those lines that are, you can reinterpret them in different ways. An example, I think, something that is a remake of a source material that's good is Dredd. The recent Dredd film, you had the Judge Dredd film, which were both adaptations of the comic book Earth AD, or 2000 Earth AD. I forgot the exact title of the book, the comic, but a very popular comic book. And they both bring something very different to it. I enjoy both movies, and I think that's okay. There's nothing wrong with taking a source material that is not a movie, that was never intended to necessarily be a movie. It was created in its own right for its own material, its own what's the word I'm looking for here?
Well, it was in its
format.
own
format.
It was in its own format.
I think that there's nothing wrong with trying to adapt that to a different medium. When you adapt a book, of a comic book, a video game, even a board game, as I mentioned. Yes, that is at least trying something different. Sometimes they pan out good, sometimes they pan out, and it all depends on how you do at adapting the source material, how the quality of your source material. Hence, Battleship being such a horrible movie. But you can still get how many versions do we have of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and some of them are good and some of them are bad.
Some of the most popular movies, or some of the most frequently made movies, are Dracula, based on source material from Bram Stoker, and then Oliver Twist. Those are two of the top three, I think.
Most remade,
most made movies.
Yeah,
they're just taking a different version of the source material, and that's fine. That I don't consider a remake. You're just taking a source material that either you were inspired by, or you like, you enjoy, and you want to kind of put your own little spot on the story, and do that story your own way. You're not really remaking it because it was done in a different format, like you said. But when you remake a movie that was only intended to be a movie, you're just, I don't understand the purpose of that. Nobody writes a book called Hamlet and has it be kind of identical to the original Hamlet, just a little bit different, slapping their Hamlet title on there so people will buy it. People in the same genres don't make an exact replica or a replica of something in that genre. Cover bands aren't popular because nobody wants to hear their material, their cover material. They want to hear originals. And that's all movie remakes are, is just covering somebody else's work.
Now, I think it's funny that you mentioned the music and aspect of it, because we can look at a band that can take a style and create it. For example, the Donnas. The Donnas, they're more of a tribute to these styles that they love. They take the styles of Van Halen and Def Leppard and these 80s bands and 70s bands.
They've got a little bit of a punk influence in there.
Yeah, they have all these different things, but they pay tribute to them. Shaun of the Dead is not a remake. Shaun of the Dead is a tribute. It's an homage to these films, and but it brings its own unique spin to it. It creates this original vision. While at the same time having these moments that are tributes to it. In Shaun of the Dead, there's literally the music from Day of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead in it. They're paying tribute, but at the same time offering something new to the table instead of just making literally a copy and showing how unoriginal they can be and how much they just want to get a paycheck. And I think if you're going to do something with film, want to pay tribute to these movies that you love, you don't need to do Gus Van Sant's Psycho remake where it's shot for shot exactly the same. It provides nothing. There's a reason it's considered one of the worst remakes of all time, because it did nothing for the genre.
Now, in certain instances, like 12 Angry Men, it's kind of similar to a shot-by-shot remake, but it was all done in tribute to the original movie. All the actors involved were very accomplished and very popular. George C. Scott in there, Tony Danza, international superstar Tony Danza. And these guys, they wanted to do this film because they enjoyed the original. I like both of them. They put a little bit different kind of a twist on it, made it a little bit more modern. But the story was pretty much the same. It was halfway decent, though, because it was like they were trying to pay tribute to the original version that they enjoyed so much.
Yeah, and it's not always a problem when you try and, there are some good examples. As you mentioned, 12 Angry Men. I'm a big fan of Sabrina. The remake is, while being almost exactly the same in the storyline, still I felt was done well, made it. But at the end of the day, as much as I love the new Sabrina with Harrison Ford, and I think it offered something new, I can't help feeling when I watch it that I should be watching the original. It's the same as when I watched Across the Universe. It made me wish I was listening to the Beatles songs and not listening to these bad versions that other people that I know numerous people who enjoy those much more than the Beatles versions. But for me, it made me wish I was listening to the Beatles instead of these poor knockoffs of it. It makes me think of the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie Knockoff, where they're just ripping off things that are, it's inferior quality. That's all it is. How many Nightmare on Elm Streets do I have to sit through? How many movies that literally are trying to just bring it to a new audience but do nothing for it. They can't match the quality. The Dawn of the Dead, I could go off all day how much I hated that movie.
Yeah, and you know what? If you want to do sequels to movies, I'm fine with that. If you want to do a sequel to expand the universe on Star Wars, I would rather see Star Wars, the 100th movie that expands the universe and is a sequel or a prequel or whatever to it, than see one New Hope remade. That serves no purpose to remake a movie. Add something new to the genre, add something new to the franchise. Do something interesting and creative taking their ideas and making them your own instead of just rehashing their ideas.
Now, I want to, we seem to be focusing on a lot of negative things about it, so I want to bring up a different way of viewing it. How often are there remakes that we see that, we've never heard of the original movies, or we don't even necessarily know they're remakes? For example, True Lies. I literally, while researching this, just found out that True Lies is a remake of some foreign film. I had never heard of it. I had no idea. I didn't know. The Departed won the Best Picture award, and it's a remake of two Hong Kong films that had come out within the last 5 years before it was made. And a lot of people feel that they're superior. Jungle to Jungle even is a remake of a foreign film. How sometimes we don't even know that these films are out there and they're remakes. How do you feel about that?
I really don't like. I don't like remakes. If that movie is good enough, I'm eventually going to find it. I kind of go out and search out movies and stuff like that. I'm going to find those original movies that are decent. I don't think we need. Now, I love True Lies. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think that we need to continually, remake these for an American audience. Like I was kind of touching on earlier, I don't think necessarily that American audiences are stupid enough to not enjoy, or dumb enough to not enjoy a foreign film and read the subtitles.
Yeah, and I think this is definitely a problem with the marketing and the structure of our industry within the United States. If you look at the rest of the world, how many of our films get out there? I'm glad to see. Since I work at the theater, I see that Bollywood films are definitely getting much more of an audience in the U.S. But are they hitting an American audience? No, they're just hitting the people who have moved here from India, or their families are Indian, or people who are fans of that genre specifically. And, even now we're trying to get them out there. They're not marketing. But you do get some successes like Instructions Not Included, which was a Spanish language film, became the highest grossing Spanish language film of all time. Amelie was a French film. It made $34 million in the box office when it came out. But those are very rare exceptions. I think it's definitely a problem with our industry, whereas you look over at the rest of the world, they get films from all different countries. They realize that the market is bigger than just theirs. They may still focus on their market, but they realize that there's other films out there. I think that's a problem. A bigger problem within our industry is one, we're so focused on creating and while I understand the good aspect of that of bringing jobs in and stuff like that, at the same time you're not giving us a chance. You're closing off your audience to these films that they should be exposed to. There's a reason. Why does nobody? How come at the Academy Awards we hope we know the foreign language films? How often do you know those films? Nobody ever does. That's a problem.
Yeah, and that's a problem. And like, if you take a movie like I'm staring right here at the Downfall poster. I freaking love the movie Downfall. If you were to do an American remake of that in English, it would be terrible. The whole point of that movie is the way the characters are, speaking. They actually suck you into that movie speaking the German language. And the guy who plays Hitler in that movie, Bruno Ganz, he does a fabulous job of actually getting you to believe that this is Hitler. You couldn't do that in an American remake. You know what Hollywood needs to do is all this money that they're spending on remakes, all this money that they're spending on remaking foreign films, remaking like Red Dawn. Did that need to be remade? Really? This soon? Take that money that you're spending on all these things and invest it in distribution rights for foreign films. Bring them over here. Saturate the audience. It may not work out at first, but you're going to start to develop an audience of people who like these foreign films. I mean, over in Japan or Asia, you've got lots of great horror movies that aren't being seen over here. That are obviously being remade.
Yeah, they become cult films. I mean, Oldboy was huge. It was a massive cult film. And then we get the remake of it that it performed extremely poorly at the box office. Why? Because the fans of that, the movie wasn't marketed well. Two, the fans of the film already saw the movie. They didn't need to see it again. Why would they need to watch it again? The first one, the original was so great. We didn't need the remake. I didn't even see the remake because I loved the original. I had no desire to. What was the point?
Yeah, I think I bought you the special edition of Oldboy for Christmas. I think it's Korean actually.
Yeah, it's Korean.
Korean. Asia also has a whole booming action action type movies over there, especially like in Hong Kong and in Thailand.
Yeah, you just had the Raid 2. The Raid Redemption is becoming big. That's I think Indonesia, and it's becoming hits. It's becoming and I mean think about it. If we had an engine that was pushing these films for them to watch, instead of trying to remake them and redo them, if we were trying to push them out and get the audience aware of them. And one, I think it would help us be a little more understanding of different cultures of the world, which we often as Americans get criticized for. And two, I think it would help people appreciate the complexities of other culture styles and their filming, the techniques. I mean, those films are made in different ways. They have different ways of shooting the film, of editing, everything. And it can help create the reason. The Matrix was basically a tribute to all those Hong Kong action films, but it was its own original film. It took something that it was inspired by and created it. And there was a reason Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was so popular when it came out too, because it was the same thing. That's all Matrix was doing. And I think that's what we need to be focusing on, is if we're going to make movies that are inspired by other cultures, don't remake them. Do a tribute to them like The Matrix did, or just release those films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which won, I think, the best foreign film.
Yeah, and like I said, the millions upon millions of dollars that you're spending on these remakes just by distribution rights to these movies, they're far cheaper to do. You can save a lot of money, make an extra blockbuster that year, and you still get a lot of movies out there that the audience here hasn't seen. And that's just one way I think that we can get rid of this kind of stale environment that we're having in the movies these days. I think also piracy. And I know you've got a lot to say about this. Piracy is also one of the reasons they're afraid to take chances. Because unless they're sure that the movie is going to make big bang, they don't want to make a movie like that.
Oh yeah, I've been educated quite well on how piracy actually affects a lot of different things, and exactly that is a huge part of the reason that we see so many. Why take a chance when you don't know what your film's going to do? Because the market is so soft now. Like every year, box office revenues go up, but every year attendance goes down. This is due to inflation, different things like 3D, D-Box coming in, IMAX having higher prices, and stuff like that. And we're heading towards a marketplace where all we're going to see are these big blockbuster, for the most part, remakes. I mean, we will still get our Interstellars, which is, it just came out a while back, and I think we're going to get these original films that very, very rarely are we going to get them to take these chances and stuff. The only reason, for example, I would say Interstellar got made is because Christopher Nolan had so much clout with his franchise of the Batman in an adaptation, which is different of a remake, but is such a market right now of adapting things people are familiar with. That's the only reason, is how successful he was with that. People now respect him as a filmmaker. And look, Inception was a huge hit. What's wrong? That was a chance. They spent money on that film. They did it, and that movie became a huge hit and became things. People want something new. They want something that's not they haven't treaded over again. It's not the same thing they're completely familiar with. I think we're slowly starting to realize that it is becoming a little saturated in the market with remakes. And I think we're starting to see that. I think that the revenue of these films is going down. The superhero genre, for example, which is an adaptation genre, even that's going down. The films aren't bringing in as much money as they used to. We're not seeing those massive hits like we did when the genre first became big, starting with Spider-Man and X-Men. Now it's fatigued. So I think we're going to fatigue out on these remakes as and I think we will start to.
I hope so.
I hope so too. I think we'll see more adaptations of literary sources. They will still be remakes, but it'll be different. It won't necessarily be remakes of stuff that people are so familiar with. You're going to see remakes of very older films. Like I said, Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which didn't make that much money, was a remake of a film most people aren't familiar with. And I don't know if I'm completely opposed to that. Yes, I would like to see original. But again, that's based off a book. So, the film... you can still make a good remake. We've ragged on them here, and before, I don't.
Well, let me just touch on one more point. It's actually some more research I did that I just forgot about until now. But I looked at last year's movies, and I looked at the movies from 1984, the top 10 grossing movies for each year. Last year in 2013, all but 2 movies were either remakes, sequels, prequels, something like that. A movie that had already been done, just redoing it. If you go back to 1983 or 84, I think I checked, and you look at the top grossing movies, the top 10 grossing movies from there, only 2 of them were a movie that was a sequel, prequel, remake, something like that. So that kind of gives you just an idea of how popular this is right now and how kind of a problem it is. You're only putting money into these remakes, sequels, prequels. Like I said, I'd rather watch a sequel than a remake, but still, it's just a symptom of the unoriginality in Hollywood.
Yeah, before we move on any further, I do want to mention that thing, Frozen. It's an adaptation of a fairy tale, a classic story. And look at that. It was an original. It was an original idea that people aren't very familiar with. They put their own spin on it. They changed the story a little bit. due to the popularity of Let It Go, the song, and how big that song they knew was going to be. They knew it was going to be a huge hit. And look, what did they create? They created a phenomenon. It's the highest grossing Disney animated film of all time. It is a massive phenomenon. I mean, everyone is familiar with it. It's become a huge thing, and that's what you get for making something that people weren't familiar with. They weren't burnt out on. I think that's what can happen when you create an original story.
And you look at the just kind of going off of what you said there, the best-selling movie of all time, gross-wise, just straight gross-wise, was Avatar. In this era of consistently doing sequels, remakes, or these older movies, this material that everybody already knows and is already familiar with, and then you bring out something like Avatar. Now I know you rag on it because it's like Pocahontas in space or something like that. Well, but it's still original.
Exactly. They took a story, because as they say, there's only 9 stories or whatever. They took a story that you know, and they created something new and their own and unique. Now, we may be familiar with the story, but it's the way they did it that made it work. I may think it is not held up as well on my second and third and fourth watches as much as I had hoped for, but I would like to say that I think it's a film that that has proven that if you take something that may be known and may be tested and maybe already kind of used up in its own way. There's a reason Dances with Wolves won Best Picture. People associate with this story. They understand. You relate to the characters, and if you do it right, you can create a film that makes it feel like it's not so familiar. Makes it feel like it's something new and original, even though you know the story.
And so kind of getting off of this topic, but we're going to go and look at some information that we had written down. We don't hate all remakes. There are some remakes out there that we do enjoy. One, for instance, probably the top one that I would mention would be The Thing. A remake, John Carpenter remade it in 1982, and it's actually a remake of a movie called
The Thing from Outer Space.
The Thing from Outer Space.
It's from a 50s movie.
Yeah, it's an old movie. That's hands down the only remake I can think of that just kind of stands at the top there.
Yeah, it clearly shows that it's superior. It's one of the rare cases where I think it's superior. Because they took an idea that wasn't necessarily fleshed out well. They had a great idea, but maybe the constraints of the budget in the 50s, it was a very low budget film. Maybe I don't know why to describe it works so well. Maybe it was because the hands of somebody who really cared about it and wanted to create something that was beautiful. I think it's, like I said, it's John Carpenter's best film in my opinion.
I agree.
I mean, I think
he's my favorite director.
And I think it's one of the best horror films of all time. So I think that's an example. It's definitely the exception and not the rule. I mean,
and then we did what you call a pre-make. With The Thing.
The pre-make. And the pre-make, I think, is a good example. I don't know how I feel. Like, I go back and forth because they did try and do something different. They were saying, we want to create the story that you saw a little bit of and make it new. So at the same time, that's an example of them trying to do something creative and original, but at the end of the day, it felt like it was flat. It felt like almost the same. It played out exactly in the same manner as The Thing. And I understand that was kind of the point of the story, was that
they wanted to make a remake without actually making a remake, and they made a prequel.
And I thought it succeeded and failed in both in that respect. It did things good, it did things bad. And there's a reason I call it a pre-make. It's kind of unusual because you don't see that too often. I think another example, which I think did it a little better, it was meant to be a remake, but it's not a prequel necessarily. But it was meant to be a remake, but it tried to continue on with the same feel. Would be the Friday the 13th film. I think that film, while it was listed as a remake, wasn't necessarily a remake. It was just another. It wasn't an origin story. It could have easily been just any other film in the franchise.
Yeah, to me, I've always put it like I've drawn up a chronology of the Freddy vs. Jason thing, and I actually put the Friday the 13th remake right after the original Friday the 13th in 1980, but right before Friday the 13th Part 2. This isn't an origin story. It takes place with Jason Voorhees, not Pamela Voorhees, who was in the first one, and it kind of tells like his early killing days, I guess, before we get into Friday the 13th 2, 3, and 4. Yeah, which actually take place consecutively.
And I think another example of a film that did something where they took the original and they went in a whole new direction and tried to create something good, like Halloween, Rob Zombie's Halloween, where how was the term you described it? I think how he described it, the difference between his film and the John Carpenter
No,
film.
I don't even remember.
I believe it was something like, if his was a snapshot of what was going on, this was delving into the psychological aspect. I forgot exactly what he said.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed, more so than the killing and all that stuff that you got in the original Halloween, where he's going after Jamie Lee Curtis and everything like that. In this one, it's what's her face?
Sherry Moon Zombie?
No.
You're talking the Laurie Strode character?
Yeah.
Scout Taylor Compton, I think.
Yeah, she's got a weird name, so I don't really remember it. I didn't really necessarily enjoy that part of the movie. I mean, it was good, but it was basically just like the first movie. Whereas the initial parts of the movie, the initial killings and stuff like that, how he gets put into a mental insane asylum, and that whole story was really compelling and interesting, and I found that very enjoyable about the movie.
Yeah, the stuff with that kid is the stuff of nightmares. He really showed you the complexity of the character and showed how he became this character and the roots of what he was. You didn't really get to see that aspect of the character in the original Halloween, and they tried to do something different. They tried to create this story of a child, and gave you a little more understanding of what led to his motivation. Yes, he's insane, he's psychotic, but there's a reason. He was a person at one point. He wasn't just born this killer. He actually developed into this person.
He evolved from where he was originally into that character.
And I think the last film I want to mention as a really good remake would be the Night of the Living Dead remake.
The 1990 version.
The 1990 version remake of the Romero's 68.
Now, yeah, and the reason George Romero was actually the producer of this version, and the reason he actually did it was because the 1968 version was actually in public domain. If you listen to our Halloween special, I mentioned that. It's in public domain, so he didn't make any money off of it. So he wanted to make a Night of the Living Dead version where he could actually make some money off of. So he actually contacted Tom Savini, who is a special makeup effects guy.
And his friend had been involved with him since Martin.
Yeah. He was actually, in Dawn of the Dead. He did the makeup for that. He was in Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead. Eventually he was in. He's Sex Machine from the movie From Dusk Till Dawn, if you don't know who I'm talking about. And he had him direct it.
And he wrote it himself, too. Romero wrote the screenplay for the remake. So you had the person who wrote the original also still involved in this remake.
Yeah. Like I said, he just wanted to remake it to make some money off of his product that is hugely popular, but he wasn't receiving a dime from.
Yeah, maybe it seems to me like horror seems to really understand how to remake their films and pay tribute to them. Because, I'm thinking of other examples like The Hills Have Eyes and stuff like that, where they really did really understand what the films are going for. But again, why? I think for the most part, but I know we gave some examples of what we love, but I want to finish on the thought that why? Some of those films are great. The originals were wonderful. We don't need the remake. I love film has existed for over 100 years, not just the last 20 or 30. I don't need to just watch new stuff. I can watch the stuff that was made before in a different time.
Yeah. Do yourself a favor. Try to avoid remakes if you can. Go out and watch the originals first. If you're going to watch a remake, watch the originals first, because the great movies have been made since the beginning of film, and it's not something that has to look fresh and new and original for you to enjoy it. You can still go back to the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. We're remaking movies from the 80s and 90s now. You can still go back to those times, and they were still putting out great movies. So, like you said, why? Just go out and watch the original.
I think that's a good way to end the final thought for it. Is watch the originals. The remakes may offer something, but the original was how it was meant to be.
Tea time. Tea time.
Well, I want to welcome you to another installment of Tea Time here. It's going to be a little different. As we mentioned earlier, I don't have tea with me, so my beverage for this evening will be a nice Shiner Bock, which is what I got.
It's beer time, not tea time.
Yeah, it's beer. So we'll officially dub it tonight's version Beer Time with Mr. Joshua. Tonight I'm going to talk about a subject that my brother's not a fan of, and I wish he was. And I'd like to go into it and talk about how amazing it is, and that's the show of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I think it's one of before I go into it, let me hear your thought.
Well, I don't really like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. A funny thing, I was just watching Big Bang Theory the other day where they were showing an episode where Leonard was trying to get Penny to get into Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it kind of like, you're the Leonard, I'm the Penny. I watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I'm like, it was okay.
I don't think I like your comparisons to Leonard and Penny, but just because of the nature of our relationship. But I want to talk about how I think the show was kind of a game changer for TV, and I think even though you're not a fan of it, you see how much it impacted TV culture afterwards, and what was a cult show. I mean, Joss Whedon. This is what made Joss Whedon. He got our Avengers.
Say it made his career.
Yeah, I mean, this is the man who made the third highest grossing film in the United States of all time, The Avengers. And it all started with this. I mean, technically it all started with the movie.
Which he wrote, and he thought they did a terrible version of.
Yeah, they did some script edits with Donald Sutherland, Chrissy Swanson, Luke Perry, Luke Perry, for any of you 90s people out there. But I think the show really launched his career. It launched the careers of a lot of the actors. I mean, there's so much I can say about this, but the things I want to focus on are how much it has impacted culture since then. So the show ran from 1997 to 2003. I became a fan of it near the end of it. I only actually started watching the first time I ever watched an episode was actually the season premiere of the 6th season, when it switched over from WB to UPN, with her being brought back to life. Spoiler alert. Obviously, it's not that big a deal. She dies a bunch of times in the show. But I think that was when it hit me. I got into it, and I only actually started watching the episodes air. I didn't even get to see the finale air live because I wasn't caught up, and I didn't want to spoil too much of the show for me. But I grew with it, and the DVD generation I was able to buy I started buying it before the 3rd season even came out. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the characters. It started because I loved all the women on the show. I'm not going to lie. I'm a huge Allison Hannigan fan. That's what led to me watching it. I hated Sarah Michelle Gellar initially, but I ended up loving her. She ended up being one of my favorite characters on the show. And then Emma Caulfield, Charisma Carpenter. There was just so many women, Amber Benson, that really drew me into the show. And then it is kind of unfortunate how much I fell in love with the show. I kind of became obsessive about it.
And don't forget about the super hot Armin Shermerman.
Oh yes, of course. He it's fun fact. He actually says he gets noted more for that than he does for playing the Principal Snyder than he does for playing Quark. That was a bigger
Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, and so I think that's kind of funny, and that's another thing that helped contribute to my love of the show. The show's style has influenced so many shows that have come after it, even up to Doctor Who, which obviously, if you've listened to our other episodes, I'm a huge fan of. When the show was brought back by Russell T Davies in 2005, he has stated that his inspiration for the format was inspired completely by Buffy, pretty much, which was a huge hit in the UK when it actually started airing over there. But so many other shows, Smallville, Supernatural, all these shows that took this kind of witty...
Basically anything on the CW.
Definitely anything on there, any science fiction show on there for sure. But it took this kind of witty pop culture scenario and took these people that were very modern and real to the youth audience and put them in fantastical science fiction fantasy situations, and you could have fun with the show and create the show's about a girl who was a cheerleader, killing vampires and demons and stuff like that. I mean, you get the show represents what it's supposed to be, but it's amazing how adult the show can be at the same time. And I think that's something that you see in a lot of its knockoffs. Like Smallville, I think, for example, took the formula that they set up and improved on it by creating the massive epilogue section of it. And so I think the show has inspired so many knockoffs and so many people that are inspired by these characters and the way they interact and talk with people and stuff like that. So I think... First and foremost, that's the most important thing about it. You can mention the show is the impact it had on television that came after. Second most, Joss Whedon. We have Serenity and Firefly, which were huge. Dollhouse, lots of other shows by him. Obviously, the Angel spinoff. But now his career has moved into movies, and he's become this kind of icon himself. I mean, I was fortunate enough to meet him, and it's funny how Buffy is still such a part of his life. When I was talking with him on set with the Avengers, I was mentioning how huge a fan I was and how nerdy I was, and he's like, "I'm the guy who writes it. How big a fan do you think I am?" He basically made that comment that it's still that personal, it's still his baby, and of all the things I think he's involved with, just from the conversation alone, that I think is one of his most important things in his life.
And you got him to sign your Buffy musical CD too.
Yeah, and well, now that you mention that, I want to talk about a few of the episodes that I think are something that other shows didn't do. You had a musical episode that Joss Whedon went out and he sequestered himself in a room and learned how to write music. He had never wrote music before, and he wanted to make this musical episode. And he went and wrote the music, and it fits in with the story. It fits in with the timeline of the series, and it really advances. It makes sense within the plot.
And that's something that they actually stole and used in the TV show Scrubs. Scrubs had their whole musical episode.
Yeah,
it's God Love.
Yeah, it created this new thing, and it was something so unique and original you hadn't seen on TV. Another example is they did a silent episode that was called Hush, where the majority of the 45-minute episode, about over 30 minutes of the episode, was just score. No one was and sound. There was no talking because everyone had lost their voice. And you didn't see things like this being tested and done on television. You didn't see people trying to make a show that had something to say, but was still fun and silly at the same time. The episode "The Body" is my personal favorite. I think it's one of the best television episodes I've ever seen. There's no music in it. It's a story about someone dying, and it's presented even in the show that's completely about fantastic real things. Presents a realistic portion of representation of loss and what it means to suffer, and how you react and how the people around you react. And I don't know, have I shown you any of these episodes? Can you give any comment on those?
The only
three?
one I can remember, I think I've seen the musical episode, and I know I've seen Hush, because I remember the one scene where Allison Hannigan Willow is talking about stabbing somebody. They're having a meeting, and all she can do is the hand motion, and it doesn't look like a stabbing hand motion.
It looks a little more vulgar than that.
Yeah. So I have seen the episodes. The show, it spawned all these supernaturals and all these other crazy shows on the CW that I really have no interest watching. And I watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's okay, like I said. It's not, in my mind, it's not great. I do recognize what it's done for television and stuff like that. It doesn't speak to me at all. These teenagers don't seem real to me. The story, I just don't think, honestly, I don't think horror does very well on television. I love horror movies, but Walking Dead's kind of an exception. But horror in general, I don't think really does too well on television, and that's an example. I think Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I don't think it does. It sets itself apart. In my mind, anyway, it doesn't do anything fun. Doesn't suck me in to the story.
Yeah, it's not. I wouldn't even call it horror almost, because it's too silly most of the time. It's too silly, and it's dramatic. In fact, the show I compare it to most to that I think is Stargate SG-1, which started I think in '97, the same year. And they're both very similar with style, with Monster of the Week type episodes, with an overarching story going on, but the difference is the nature of the characters. Stargate SG-1 is a much more serious, adult-aimed show, whereas Buffy is meant to be, goofy and pop culture referenced, and the character is a silly high school girl. So I think that's the biggest aspect of the show that I would compare it to other shows. It spawned this idea that you can have individual episodes in an overall story. I mean, that was one of the shows that definitely brought that more into pop culture reference. Other shows had been doing it, but yes, it created this fun genre. And I mean, these careers of a lot of the actors, I think it went on. Sarah Michelle Gellar, Allison Hannigan was huge on How I Met Your Mother.
James Marsters was on Smallville.
He was on Smallville.
That's the only thing I really know him from.
He was also. There's been a lot of it. So a lot of these people went on and had large careers afterwards. You had the spin-off show of Angel, and I think the show has aged well, honestly. It hasn't been gone that long. It went off the air just over 10 years ago, but I think it's aged well, and I think there's a reason it had a cult following. There's a reason I love it so much. While not every episode is amazing, like any show, I think the characters are relatable, even though you may not say they're realistic, which I can see your point of view. They live in a very fictionalized universe, but that's okay with me. I don't mind that necessarily. I think I feel for them. I want to see their journey and where it goes.
And one of the other points I kind of want to make about it is that it was responsible for the supernaturals and the a lot of the shows on the CW. I can't honestly right now think of any specific examples other than that one, but it was also, I think, responsible for the de-horrification of vampires. You get Spike and you get Angel, and Interview with the Vampire did it in the movies with Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, Lestat and stuff like that, kind of pansified defanged, if you will, the vampires. And I think Buffy took it a little bit further, and it eventually led to the travesty that was Twilight.
I will agree with you with that. While Interview with the Vampire thing, I don't agree that it was a wussified version, as you know. I would say it is a more human portrayal of vampires it was meant to be, much like Near Dark was, even though I didn't like the approach personally. I didn't read the source material, and it's not my cup of tea. I didn't like the movie itself. I agree, I didn't enjoy the film. Whereas I think Buffy is directly related. I mean, Edward is pretty much a complete knockoff of Angel, the vampire with a soul, but I think Buffy did it better. I mean, that's what it comes down to. They didn't, and if you watch the show, there's the tragedy of when he loses his soul and how that affects everything and how that affects the relationship and what he becomes when he doesn't have his soul, how different he was. So I think I think it didn't really hurt the genre too much. I think it created something in it that was unique, that people associated with, and I think that what we saw come after it, while yes, I don't agree that The Vampire Diaries is a good show, and all those things that came after.
Or the V Word, I think there's one called the V Word. Just terrible. And then you get the TV remake, like we were talking about earlier, of Teen Wolf. You get the vampire thing coming in there.
And so, yeah, there's just so much. But to finish it off, I think the show is aged well. I think the stories have heart and creativity and originality. There's some great sci-fi stuff, fantasy stuff in there. Episodes that really leave you with a feeling afterwards of I think a good show, while it can be fun, I think you do get in every great show, Star Trek, SG-1, all these great sci-fi fantasy shows, they have episodes that leave you just not knowing how to feel afterwards. And I have yet to see, I can name very few episodes of shows that has impacted me as much as The Body. I think the show stands I would put it on the level of some of my favorite shows, definitely up there with some of my Star Treks and everything like that. I would not underrate this show at all. And in fact, I think I'm going to start a rewatch of it soon.
Okay, do you have a pick of the week for us?
My pick of the week this week is actually going to be a Bollywood film that I watched called Happy New Year. It was just released in the theaters a while back. Hopefully it'll be coming out on video soon. It's kind of an Ocean's 11 meets Step Up. I don't know, because it's a Bollywood film, so there's lots of dancing and singing in it. It's 3 hours long, though. Check it out. It's great.
What are you doing in my swamp?
And welcome to a very special episode of Schreck Swamp. Actually, today I have a special guest with me. Her name is going to be Chorizo. Chorizo, would you say howdy?
Hello.
All right, so today we're going to be discussing a book that is over 100 years old. Both of us have read this book. It's written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's called The Princess of Mars. Do you have any thoughts on the book? Did you know about A Princess of Mars before it came out? Before I told you about it.
I was going to say before. No, and actually I just learned that it's over 100 years old. I actually didn't know that until just now. But no, when I learned about Princess of Mars is when you and I watched John Carter together. At which point you explained a little bit more about the foundation of John Carter, which got me interested in the book. But before that, I didn't even know that it existed.
Yeah, and John Carter was a Disney movie that came out a few years ago, I think 2012. The book's basically, it was written in 1912 under the name Normal Bean. They actually released it under Norman Bean. Edgar Rice Burroughs was trying to make a little extra cash on the side and didn't want anybody who knew him to know that he was engaging in this fantastic thing. They thought he would think he thought that they would think that he was crazy or something like that. So he released it under Normal Bean, and it became a huge success. He's actually most famous for his Tarzan books, but me being a more science fiction guy, more interested in the Barsoom series, which is the name of the planet Mars. And this is the first book in there called The Princess of Mars. It was written in 1912 and actually 1911, serialized in 1912, but it didn't appear in book form until 1917. Have you read any of the other books in the series?
I started to read the next one, which was The Gods of Mars.
The Gods of Mars.
Yeah. And I think just because I was reading it in just immediately after I stopped The Princess of Mars, it was just too much too soon. But so no, I have not read any other books in the series. However, I definitely want to read them, and I have them on my Kindle, and because they were free. And so I have The Gods of Mars, and then what's the one that comes after
Warlord
that?
of Mars.
Warlord of Mars, yeah. So I do have those.
Well, I've only read The Princess of Mars myself. I do plan on reading all the books. I actually just found an old bookstore where I got all the old copies of books 6 through 11. So I'm kind of going to be conquering those here shortly. But I've read, and actually I'm reading the next Sword of Truth book that just came out. So I'm kind of on a Barsoom hiatus, if you would, at the moment. But what did you like about the book? I remember you read it before I did. Because I was in the middle of reading something else at the time. You read it before I did. And I remember you telling me, oh, you got to read this. I wish we could discuss it together. What did you like about the book?
It was an exciting book. There was a lot of excitement in it, whether it was the action scenes, because there was definitely a lot of action that happened in the book. But overall, just the plot was just really exciting. This is actually one of the rare science fiction books that I've actually read. My go-to genre is mystery.
But you have read the C.S. Lewis books, his science fiction trilogy.
Yes, I did. Yes, oh gosh, and the name of it is eluding me. But yes, I've read C.S. Lewis's science fiction trilogy, and that was probably my first science fiction trilogy that I read. And at the time, I was really into C.S. Lewis. I read, the Chronicles of Narnia and things like that. But anyways, but this was the first, like I said, this was the first one that I really got into. Because C.S. Lewis was a bit hard to get into. I think most of it is because his science fiction works are his philosophical works, whereas the Chronicles of Narnia are more of his theological works. But anyways, I'm not going to go into that.
Yeah, let's go back to John Carter and the Princess of Mars here.
And so anyway, like I was saying, this was actually the first really solid science fiction book and action book that I've read, because my go-to genre is mystery and suspense and things like that. And so I just found the entire book incredibly exciting. I liked the premise of it. I liked that, while he did encounter aliens, they weren't just the cliche little green men, and that even...
Well, they're big green men.
They're big green men with lots of arms. But that's beyond the point. But it wasn't, it just wasn't like your cliche sort of, big-eyed monster type of thing either. And while the characters were aliens, they were relatable. Is something that I really liked about him. And you fell in love with, the main, main guy of the Tharks, Tars Tarkas. Yeah, you fell in love with Tars Tarkas and his plight with his daughter and his wife and things like that. You fell in love with Dejah Thoris. You really did, who's the leading lady, the princess, the Princess of Mars. You really did. I really liked her. I felt that she embodied a lot of strength in women. So I guess
she's a very strong female character.
She is. She's very strong in multiple senses of the word. But at the same time, there was this bond that she formed with John Carter, and then there's just a lot of relatable characters and a lot of really exciting characters who are in there. I like that he was able to present Mars, or Barsoom as it's called, in a way that presents it as having culture and having life and having, these other struggles.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I like in my science fiction. I'm a big Isaac Asimov fan, and I really like how he creates an entire world, and you get to know like the religion, the culture, the different people in there, the different kind of cultural stigmas and stuff like that they have. And Edgar Rice Burroughs does a good job in A Princess of Mars of actually sucking you into the world of Barsoom. Mm-hmm. He did a very good job on that. Also, the book is very fast paced. It's written like action scene, at one after the other, and it's this whole story of his first adventure on Barsoom. And it just kind of, he doesn't give, if you read Tolkien or something like that, where he gives a lot of overt descriptions about everything, he'll go on for 2 pages about the way this wall looks. Well, he doesn't do that at all here. Everything's very, very superficial. He gives you the descriptions that you need to kind of picture it in your head, and then moves right on to the action. It's a very heroic story as well. I've mentioned several times on other podcasts about how much I love the heroic type. I like my heroes to be heroes. And John Carter is that old kind of romantic kind of King Arthur's Round Table kind of hero.
Right. He adheres to higher conduct, I guess. The chivalry is not dead in The Princess of Mars, where, even, I mean, he treats even his opponents with respect. And actually, wasn't John Carter fighting a war at the time when he was taken to Barsoom?
No, in the book, he's actually on the frontier, and he's looking for gold.
Oh, that's right. But
he's in the mid 1800s or the late 1800s, I guess, like the 1870s, 1880s. He was a Civil War vet.
There we go. Yeah.
And he's just looking for gold on Earth, and he's being attacked by some Indians and stuff like that.
Okay, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I knew the war part was in there. So I mean, yeah, he's still a gentleman. That he can still engage, like the Tharks, for example. He worked his way up through the Thark, hierarchy, I guess.
Until it became a Jeddak, which is the kind of the title for a king or a chieftain on Barsoom.
Yeah, but he did so in a gentlemanly way. It wasn't done out of being power hungry or whatever. And all of his interactions with Deja Thoris are always gentlemanly.
And then that is a product of the time that it was written in the early 1900s, 1911, that kind of stuff. Men were still very much men who treated women with respect. It didn't really kind of change until the 1960s or so, but it was heavily in use in that period of time, the early 1900s. This is pre-World War I, pre-World War II. Women were at home cooking, taking care of the families. Men were doing the work, and they always treated their women with respect. Right,
and going back to Deja Thoris, and kind of just springboarding off of that, is that you see Deja Thoris have, I guess, putting it into that context, she breaks out of that typical mold of what we would be used to, during that time of what a woman's role is, what a man's role is, whatever. But with Deja, it's blended in a way. Because she's a princess, and so she still has that sense of femininity to her, but she's also a warrior.
Yeah, she's not a princess like you find in a Disney movie or anything like that. She is a Martian princess on this harsh, brutal environment of Mars, which has very little water, very little oxygen for people to survive on. And she's a beautiful princess. You don't really get it a whole lot in a lot of the pictures you find. She's scantily clad, but in the book, she is completely naked. Everybody on Barsoom is completely naked. They don't wear any clothes or anything like that. But she's she's elegant and refined as a princess, but she's also, like you said, the warrior.
Yeah. Well, and the shifting gears here a little bit, one thing that I liked about the book is that there were a lot of similarities to Earth from Barsoom, because you have like the human type of creature.
The red Martians
yeah.
Similar.
Because in that book you only meet the red and the green Martians.
Yeah, in the other books you meet the white Martians and the black Martians as well.
Yeah, there's talk of other Martians and things like that. And then of course you meet like some of the creatures. But anyways, but each tribe or each group of Martians have their own culture and things like that, and they have their own technologies. And that was one thing that I appreciated about the book, is that I feel sometimes with a lot of science fiction, and don't get me wrong, I like science fiction, I do, but sometimes what I get a little peeved by is that it's like, oh, Earth is so primitive and whatnot compared to all these other, Martian cultures or alien cultures and things like that. And they're so far above, their technology is just like over the top and just super, just radical.
And whereas it's the exact opposite in this book.
Right. In this one, it's more like they have different technology. It's not that it's superior to Earth technology, but it's different. It's exclusive to Barsoom, which is something that I appreciated about it, about the book. Because, like I said, I think that sometimes with science fiction, people can get a little carried away because the imagination just kind of gets rolling. And like I said, that's fine, that's great. But this was, I don't know, I felt it was refreshing, even though it's old. It's an old book, but
did you enjoy the book?
Very much so, and I would actually reread the book, and I recommend other people to read it as well.
Yeah, I would say go check out John Carter of Mars. It's not that great of a movie, but it got me thinking. It's it's one of those stories that a lot of science fiction people have been influenced by, and you can kind of see in James Cameron movies and stuff like that the heavy influence that was placed on him because of these books. The book is much better than the movie. It's very fast paced. I haven't read the second or through the 11th books yet, but I am actually looking forward to it. Will you continue on with the series?
Yes.
Alrighty, so that's going to be our Shrek Swamp for this week. Thank you to Chorizo for joining us and discussing the Princess of Mars. And we're going to go now to the great and wonderful Final Countdown.
It's the final countdown.
And now we're going to do our Final Countdown. This week we're going to go into the musical realm, and we're going to tell you our top supergroup. So we're going to pick members from existing bands, existing artists, that kind of stuff, kind of come up with what type of music they're going to be playing, and kind of just give you an idea of what we would want to hear, from a supergroup. You see supergroups all the time, but these are going to be ours. Do you have any thoughts on your supergroup?
Yeah, I'd like to say before we go into discuss the style, the differences we're going for in our supergroups. We both created, I think, in different genres. We thought more specifically into a genre. Wanted to keep people from a certain style of music and put them together with others of that same styling, and where I decided I wanted to be a little bit more how my musical tastes are, which is a little more extreme aggressive metal, the darker end of metal, the more, death metals, the gore grinds, the stuff like that, bands like this that are a little more extreme and out there. That's what I decided to go with for my genre. What kind of musical stylings did you pick?
Well, I actually wrote up a little blurb about my band that I've named Spirits Rebellious, and it's an in-your-face, straight-ahead hard rock band that focuses all of its efforts into creative, in-depth concept pieces and an amazing live show. Each member of the band was picked for 3 reasons. They all have great songwriting capabilities, they have a live performance theatricality to them, and they also have a high level of musicianship that works well together. You try to make a supergroup with a bunch of people from different genres of music, it's not going to work and it's going to suck. So I wanted my people to play a similar kind of music and fit into this certain kind of mold, and that's what I've got.
Well, since you pointed out that you named your band Spirits Rebellious, was that it?
Yes.
Inspired by the Alice song?
The Alice Cooper song?
I'm very glad I knew that. Obviously I would, though. My band, I actually chose the name. It's the name I decided would be my band name since I think I was in middle school. I've always stuck with this band name, which is Black Death. It's inspired by the bubonic plague in there. I've always felt it was something I've always been interested in history, and especially kind of fitting with my style of my band. That it's very destructive force, and I think that encompasses them well. So why don't you go ahead and tell me who your first member is?
All right, hard rock band, someone who's a great musician. I couldn't go anywhere but Rush's Neil Peart. Peart, looks like Pert, but I think it's pronounced Peart.
Canadians.
The dude can write. His live show is friggin' amazing. Easy pick for me.
Yeah, Neil, obviously, you don't need to say anything about him. There's a reason he's recognized so well as a drummer. My drummer, you probably, like most of my members, you probably haven't heard of. His name is Donald Tardy. Maybe if you've heard of him, it was because he was the drummer for Andrew WK for a while when he wasn't playing with Obituary, which is his main band. He's been around since the 80s. The Obituary started in the 80s. He's one of the main songwriters for the band, and I think his style is very unique and very stomping.
Alrighty, so I'm going to go with my bass guitarist now. Going to be Steve Harris from Iron Maiden. The dude, I keep saying dude. The guy writes most of the music for Iron Maiden, music and lyrics, and just pick up an Iron Maiden record and you'll see how friggin' amazing he is. Not only that, but watch him play live. He's got so much energy he puts into the shows. He probably plans most of the live shows, so this guy's got to go in there too.
Yeah, my bass player is one of the only other bass players I would say is even close to being comparable on technicality of Steve Harris, and he's actually the bass player for Cannibal Corpse and some other bands. His name's Alec Webster. He's one of the lead songwriters of Cannibal Corpse, and you can look up videos of his technical skill online and see how amazing he is. And I don't need to say anything more. If you know how well the guy plays, he does it all.
All right, so because I do have a hard rock, you typically go with a rhythm guitarist and a lead guitarist, but I thought for this one here, I'd like to go with 2 lead guitarists.
Would you call that the dueling leads?
Yes. So my first one is going to be Ace Frehley from Kiss. Obviously, I mostly picked him for his theatricality, the way he performs and stuff like that. But he's also a really good writer. Just got the new album from him, Space Invader. It's really good. He does some really good writing, instrumental pieces. He's not a very good vocalist, but he writes good tracks.
Well, his technical skill may not be as
I like his style too.
as some of his other players. I was going to say his style is what defines him. He definitely has a unique feeling that makes him. My guitarist is actually someone I think that not only has a unique styling, but they are an extremely talented guitar player. And that would be Bill Steer from Carcass. Not only is he talented as a metal guitar player, an extreme metal guitar player, but he also, after he left Carcass, he had a band called Firebird, which was a very blues rock trio, influenced by bands like Cream and stuff. So he has a larger genre. He understands a little bit more about melody and stuff like that than a lot of your metal guitarists might understand, and that's why I chose him as my number 2. And I just love Carcass; they shred.
Oh, of course. So my other lead guitar player is going to be Slash. You can listen to the Guns N' Roses stuff. Go check out his solo stuff, the Slash album, and then Slash featuring Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators. He's done 3 albums, 2 with the Conspirators and 1 solo. The dude's amazing guitar player, amazing soloist. He's a great writer, and even though he doesn't have the theatricality that like an Ace Frehley does, he's still up there performing well on stage every night, and just a great writer.
Would you say the dude abides, since you called him the dude again?
Oh, I did call him the dude. Oh, yeah.
That's
he abides.
My guitarist is going to be Michael Ackerfeld, the guitarist for Opeth. He is amazing. He's the lead songwriter for Opeth. Writes these massive, epic, long songs. Very creative, has lots of different styles, understands prog rock. He's much more creative than a lot of your guitarists you would see. And I also actually chose him as my vocalist because not only does he do amazing clean vocals and has this beautiful voice that's so sexy, I think he's got this beautiful growl that it makes me nice and warm and fuzzy inside. I've heard very few people that their guttural growl can rattle me inside as much. So I chose him as my guitarist and my singer. I think he's that talented. Who'd you choose as your singer?
My singer, well, the name of the band, Spirits Rebellious, I got it from an Alice Cooper song. Who's more theatrical than Alice? Nobody. And if you listen to his writing, listen to his music since the late 60s, early 70s, I mean, the guy knows how to write songs. He knows how to, give you imagery and stuff like that. And that's the type of band that I'm looking for. Of course, I would pick Alice as my singer, not only because I love him, but because he's just freaking amazing.
I don't think I can argue with that at all. So, I don't know. Hopefully someday we'll get to see Spirits Rebellious and Black Death out in concert. I think that would be the greatest thing. But that concludes our supergroup top 5 for this week. Do you have any final thoughts?
No final thoughts. Just want to make sure you come and check us out next week, which is an episode that I don't know that you're going to like too much because you probably don't know anything out that we're really going to be talking about. But if you want to learn some more stuff, check it out. We're going to be discussing one of our favorite book series, the Robot series by Isaac Asimov. Mr. Joshua is going to discuss the Before series of movies, and then we're going to be counting down our top 5 concert films, and I get to tell you about one of my favorite superheroes, the Green Hornet.
Yeah, and a couple thoughts on those. The concert films. These are movies of bands playing in concerts, and the Before series is the Before films by Before Sunrise, Sunset, and Before Midnight by Richard Linklater. And your superheroes, I am actually quite anxious to hear that.
Alrighty, so thank you to Chorizo for joining us, and we'll check you out next week.
Go away or I shall punch you a second time.